Hey, it's Grayson Peltier right back with you again. Today I'm actually going to give you a bit of a preview of the Fixerpunk podcast, ripped from the headlines, so to speak. That being the headlines of Twitter, and more specifically hashtag skate Twitter, and a gentleman by the name of Mikey Taylor, former professional skateboarder and a founder of Commune Capital, a real estate investing firm. For those that are not familiar, earlier this week, Mr. Taylor tweeted the following. Quote, "It's never been easier to make money, but it seems really hard for people to live below their means and save." This tweet was responded to with a fair amount of backlash within the skate Twitter community. And I chimed in myself and I stated that it was sort of a situation of one of my key rules to understanding political and social commentary, which is two things can be true at the same time. Because what he's saying is true in certain contexts and untrue in other contexts. And I don't think he had any ill will in these statements, but I wanted to break down sort of where I think he's actually coming from in some ways to work with this attitude, if you're well-intentioned, which I believe he is, to actually affect change or to clarify your message so that you know where the message is going and to make it clear the direction of the message and not have it cause a good amount of backlash. All right, so there are a few options here as to sort of the perspective Mr. Taylor was coming from. Mr. Taylor's a former professional skateboarder, quite noted in that field, who has founded a real estate investment firm. An interesting thing to note about his real estate investment firm, Commune Capital, number one, first thing, the name Commune. He seems to have a good level of social consciousness from that, although it's not necessarily expressed that much in his online communications. He seems to buy in a little bit to the ideas of sort of the pushers of hustle culture, but he does have a rather attenuated way of discussing things that's very cooperative and collaborative, and I can understand that he actually does have elements of that mindset, and that mindset is endemic to skateboarding culture and the cultures from which it derives. So he has some of that consciousness, but also a mix of other ideologies that's somewhat similar to the mix of ideologies that you generally see in skateboarding culture, with a few notable gaps here that maybe need to be clarified a little bit. So one option is that he's trying to express a portion of his views. He's trying to express a portion of his views, and it's not a complete statement as to the entirety of the population. I'm starting to buy this argument more and more because his ideas do make sense, and they make sense for a specific group of people. And that specific group of people and his target market seems to be sort of this target market that pretty much every finance startup that's advertising on a podcast wants. This demographic of very affluent millennials. Commune Capital in particular is actually only for individuals who have a very high income because it's a private placement investment. Private placement investments are not fully regulated by the government, and they're generally very high risk and illiquid investments. Basically, if you put your money into something like that, you should expect to lose all of it. You should already have a lot of money to take care of your needs and then some for a very long time before actually getting into an investment like that. My mother got into a bunch of those investments, put all of her savings in them because of a scammy investment advisor, and lost a ton of money, and we're still going through courts and lawsuits and all that over 10 years after she put her money into that investment to actually get it back. So they are a high-risk class of investment. I think Mikey Taylor's one's probably a legitimate one, but still this specific class of investment is specifically for people that can lose a good deal of money. So if we put it into that context, never been easier to make money? Yeah, for a upper class demographic. For people who are making good money, who have a lot of money, have enough money to have $1 million in net worth, making $200,000 a year, things of that sort. It's very easy to make money. Stock market's been going up a lot. The upper class is making money a lot quicker. Basically, the upper 20% even has been making money and growing their wealth very well. And it seems really hard for people to live below their means and save. Yeah, it's a natural tendency for some people, especially people with new money or whatever, just to spend it irresponsibly. And yeah, the message makes sense. Even a few stratas down in different places, that makes sense. What I think that may have been missing is just to make it clear that that was who the message is from, because obviously in the skateboarding community, it's not monolithic within this demographic. His investors are obviously within the demographic where this is most relevant down to, but then the public at large is not necessarily in this demographic. They're in different areas where what's causing their economic and financial distress are more systemic issues that perhaps Mikey isn't necessarily trained to understand, but that's fine. That's why I exist here, is to look at systemic issues that affect the rest of the population. So I think he came from a good place there, but maybe he was just directing it to that group, or possibly he was sort of trying to help, but sort of desperately, because he's seeing these people that are in financial distress, and he has this sort of ethos, which is in punk and skate culture, of the do-it-yourself or DIY ethos, where you can basically make, as Rob Dyrdek would say, make your own luck. You have the positive mental attitude, the PMA from Bad Brains, a famous punk band, ideas from bands like H2O, who I really respect, and do have a consciousness towards social and class issues that sometimes is missing in motivational rhetoric, and I've gone over that issue extensively in a few other videos, which I'll probably link in the description. And he was trying to help, but without the extra knowledge. And that's something that you kind of want to correct and think about. Who is this going to? It's a lot of thinking about who the person is. And as my old professor of skateboarding from USC once said, did you talk to them when explaining, like, I bring this up a lot, but it's worth repeating. When you're going out, you're trying to create a strategy to, like, work with different diverse populations, whether that's diversity in racial and ethnic realms or in socioeconomic realms. Did you talk to them? Did you hear what their problems are? And did you listen to them? So that's one important thing to realize there, is that it might just be, he thinks, okay, I'm seeing within my group of friends, my peer group, what's working for them is the ones that are being very frugal and taking their $200,000 paycheck, instead of renting out an expensive apartment, buying a really expensive house, taking that money, stashing it away, and I'm seeing that's working here. So let me share this, and I'm a little frustrated, so let me share this out, and I think this will help a lot of people, but it's because it only works in that context. Another thing that I'd like to bring up, and I think that sort of the creative mindset and the communitarian mindset of action sports cultures and punk rock culture kind of attenuates this tendency, but it's worth mentioning, is something called something that I've termed the insular adversarial strength hypothesis, or sometimes I'll just refer to it as a strength hypothesis, where the stronger the person, the more likely they are to maintain an insular attitude of just staying within their group, and be adversarial. Which means that they oppose on a fundamental and instinctual level those groups whom they find repulsive, typically lower class people of different characteristics. And they also have a moral superiority, and they believe that their moral actions lead to their status, which there's a tinge of this in here, and in some of the responses, that it's like, it seems really hard for people to live below their means and save. So he's kind of saying, well, look at me. Look, I'm strong, and you're weak, and the reason why you have a problem is because you're weak and I am morally better than you. If you have that discipline and strength of self-control, you would not be in your bad financial situation, which, yes, applied to the context of the general public, that does come off as being in this insular adversarial strength hypothesis, which is basically, let's just put it in, this is why rich people sometimes come off as jerks, or people who are at the top of their field, high performers. It's just a byproduct of the mindset necessary for success, and how you manage that byproduct kind of changes how you're perceived. And skate culture, I've been really interested in it as sort of, when I was getting my degree in political science at USC, as sort of an exception to this, that it's a communitarian culture. And a lot of this sort of in-group, out-group adversarial nature is from the fight and flight response, and that's the same response that's triggered in grave danger. And obviously, in progression and skateboarding, you're triggering that same response, but you're responding to it creatively to go and do that nollie tray flip or the three stair, something like that. And you're sort of retraining that system, and that's something that I've been very interested in trying to figure out. Whether or not you can actually become less adversarial by training yourself to respond creatively to what could be seen as a threat, and using the threat response as a creative response. That's a whole different video. That could be an entire episode of the Fixerpunk podcast that will last way longer than this. And I think that in his case, it is probably attenuated because he approved some of these moralizing comments, but he also, in some of his other comments, he described how his strategy was based upon love and a non-rival, community-oriented strategy. Not necessarily, it seemed a little bit insular, not necessarily like a full-blown social responsibility kind of approach. He's not going to sound like a band like H2O or Anti-Flag or something like that. But he seemed to have, instead of this like aggressive hustle, you got to beat them, go after them, or as I call it, the street fighter approach. He did seem to express in a lot of his tweets what I termed the street skater approach, which is that transition from aggression to creativity. Right now, the way I view it is that it could be that he was directing this to the public at large. It could be just he was directing it to potential customers of commune capital, which should not be the public at large, because those kinds of investments are for when you're really doing well financially already. And if you're going to try to get into them and you don't have basically enough money to last you the rest of your life, I would say maybe try something else. You don't want to wind up in a situation, even if it's a good investment, something goes wrong in the market, and you get wiped out. Or God forbid, some sort of fraud occurs, like what happened to my mom. But yeah, that's basically the direction where I see this. He was coming from good intentions, but maybe with a lack of consciousness toward who it would go to, where it would go to, and this is very important in communication strategy. And I think it's a good idea. Some people say just don't respond to trolls online, but I think if you have a legitimate concern that keeps coming over and over again, what I'll advise clients that work with me for digital marketing is to actually respond. And also to be careful in what you post and what you say. Be kind of aggressive, but also be clear as to what you're actually talking about. Clarity is sometimes a lost art when you're dealing with a small amount of characters. I think it is he's trying to sort of express his duality of communitarianism and individualism from the skateboarding cultural background, but could use a little tweaking. And I think it's right for him in a way. This idea is actually sort of right for lower class straight as well. He did mention, and I think that he might be actually, to a degree, applying this to the greater population at large, because he said you need to be faithful with small amounts of money. You need to be faithful with smaller things. And yeah, that's true. But there are other things there too as well. So when you have this sort of duality, you want to make the duality clear. So let's go back to this original tweet and try to fix it up. Okay, so it's never been easier to make money, but it seems really hard for people to live below their means and save. Okay, so words like always and never, tend to be not very good as factual statements, but they're very dramatic. So you could say, it hasn't been easier in recent memory to make money, but it seems really hard for people to live below their means and save. You could then, after this, I would say, you could leave that never in there. It's not too much of I'm squabbling a little bit. In a more professional writing setting, that should be gone, but here, probably fine. I'm not looking at character limits, but general idea you want to get across is, if you have the extra money, commit to saving it. So I think that would articulate his idea, and not upset for people who are in lower class stratas that do not have the resources and would need support from our society to be able to build those resources, and for whom the best economic intervention is a combination of systemic and personal interventions, which that's something that I really, really admire this particular culture for, is that some of the more liberal cultures, especially in recent years, are basically, you need the government, you need the college campus to protect you from everything and everyone, which isn't exactly true. There is a level of individual strength that needs to be developed, and then that strength attitude has to be catalyzed into creativity rather than an adversarial nature. And that's a very important point. But you can kind of soften the blow a little bit by saying, if you have the money, commit to saving it, and that if you have the money is the most important part to make it a little bit clearer. You could also have a dual track message, where you have this message, but then you can also speak about, and even finance executives, even in the highest levels of business, have spoken about the growing income inequality in America that's causing people to not be able to save even a few $100s for an emergency, nonetheless build a good investment portfolio. And they've spoken about this in a way that doesn't necessarily blame it on the person, but says that it is a different problem. So dual message, because when you have this, you have a dual idea, like it looks like he has both communitarian and individualism, so dual message might actually work. So you have this message, but then you also have the message of income inequality is a major issue, and we should be working to solve it. And I think the combination actually works the best, because if you just go and create a bunch of social programs, then you're sort of having to control people's lives through these programs, and I'm not a big fan of that. I believe in having a lot more freedom, but having that across all people and not just overly concentrated in a particular group of people. I'm ranting, but it's kind of related. When you bring both ideas to the table of, okay, we need to solve this problem in relation to people that don't have enough, and we also need to educate, and we need to train people to use their power in a better way to constructively build society. That gets the best results. That gets a better result than just pure moralism, which he's nicer than pure moralism. If you want to hear pure financial moralism, listen to Dave Ramsey for a few hours and call me after you've cried for about another 2 hours after that. But when you combine some of that moralism with also a declaration of, yes, there's a problem. Yes, it sucks. But if you have a little bit of power, then you should use it in a positive way if you can, but not to add extra stress. Because if you add extra stress to a person who's already overstressed and overtaxed, like many members of our society are, you actually wind up making the problem worse. So if you get somebody to think about saving money and they decide to not go out to eat whatever once a month, and that actually made them feel better and kind of numb their pain of their miserable existence, I guess you could say, you can make their problem worse, because then they feel even more miserable, and people who feel miserable don't necessarily perform the best at making good money, no matter how good the opportunities are. So there's always a little more nuance you can add, and a little more ways you can add different ideas so that you can hold the full truth of two things being true at the same time, and maintaining a good positive duality of communitarianism and individualism. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. If you like what you saw here, then I want you to hit subscribe button and the notification bell button, because this will be the first place here on the YouTube channel when we have the Fixerpunk podcast going, where we're going to kind of take these concepts from these cultures and go a bit deeper and try to actually create these proper applications with a good amount of discretion, and kind of making sure this moralism is in check and used in the right way. Everything used in the right way, improvising the heck out of whatever you have, and making something awesome out of something that didn't really look like anything at all other than sort of a junky environment. All right. Well, I hope to see you again next time, and I hope to see you on the Fixerpunk podcast when that becomes available. Please click subscribe and notification bell to find out when it will be available.